The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. The small community, nestled deep within the dense forests, was alive with the murmurs of everyday life. Thick trees surrounded the settlement, their ancient branches reaching up to the heavens as though the very earth held the souls of the ancestors. This was a place where tradition was sacred, where the heartbeat of the land pulsed in rhythm with the elders' wisdom. The villagers lived in harmony with the spirits, for they knew that the world of the living and the world of the ancestors were intertwined. Every tree, every river, and every stone carried the stories of their forefathers. Their customs were not just traditions, they were laws of the land, passed down from the beginning of time. But for one young woman, the weight of those traditions was beginning to feel like a heavy shackle. Zuri, a strikingly beautiful woman, with eyes that seemed to see beyond what was in front of her, stood at the edge of the village, her gaze lingering on the faraway horizon. The elders spoke of the spirits who lived there, in the distant hills beyond the trees. But Zuri didn't care for their tales. She longed to know what lay beyond them. Her heart, though full of love for her people, beat to a different rhythm. While others admired her beauty and intelligence, Zuri was not content to simply sit and listen to the wisdom of the elders. She had always questioned the way things were, why the women were meant to marry without choice, why they were expected to follow their mother's footsteps without ever dreaming of their own paths. And yet, she could never voice these thoughts aloud, not in a village where the elders spoke with the voice of the ancestors themselves, where the very air was filled with reverence for tradition. Mama Amina, Zuri's mother, sat in the corner of their small hut, weaving a basket. Her hands moved with grace, as they had for countless years. As a direct descendant of the village's founders, Mama Amina's life was defined by the customs of the elders. She embodied the strength of tradition, a woman whose every action was rooted in the wisdom of the past. "Mama, why must I follow the path you walked?" Zuri once asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mama Amina did not look up from her work, but the words hung heavy in the air. "You will understand when you have children of your own. Our ways are the ways of the ancestors. They brought us peace, prosperity, and balance. We honor them, and in turn, they honor us." But Zuri did not understand. She watched her mother, proud and unwavering in her devotion to tradition, and wondered if the world was larger than the life she had been given. She could feel her soul yearning for freedom, for a life beyond the confines of her village. But such desires were dangerous. To question the elders, to defy the ancestors, was to risk everything: your bloodline, your home, your place among the living. Elder Nia, the village matriarch, was a living reminder of the old ways. With her wise, aged eyes, she seemed to peer into Zuri's very soul whenever they spoke. Elder Nia was not just a spiritual guide. She was a force, a keeper of wisdom, who could communicate directly with the spirits of the ancestors. Her role was to ensure that balance was maintained between the living and the dead. "Zuri," Elder Nia had called to her once during a gathering, "the path you walk is the same path our ancestors walked, the same path that brought our people strength. Do not stray from it, child. The spirits watch over you." But Zuri did not know if she could trust that path. There was a fire inside her, a desire to see what lay beyond the tradition she had been taught, beyond the boundaries of her mother's wisdom and the elders' guidance. As the days passed, that fire only grew stronger. Zuri began to feel the pull of the unknown more intensely. The whispers of freedom echoed in her mind, and the elders' expectations felt like chains. She stood at the edge of the village once more, staring at the trees that bordered her home. They were ancient and full of secrets, but to Zuri, they now felt like walls that kept her from something greater, something more. The idea of marriage, of being bound to a life chosen for her, gnawed at her heart. She wanted to choose her own future, to walk her own path. But as Zuri wrestled with her thoughts, she knew the consequences of defying the ancestors. It was not just a matter of disobedience, it was a matter of survival. The land would suffer. The people would suffer. And worse, her own bloodline could be cursed for generations to come. In the quiet, Zuri heard her mother's voice once more. "Our ancestors guide us, Zuri. We are their children. They know what is best for us." And yet, in her heart, Zuri questioned whether she could accept that truth. The weight of tradition felt heavy. Her mother's hopes, the expectations of the elders, and the whispers of the unknown all collided within her. She was caught between two worlds, the world of tradition and the world of freedom. And each world called to her in a voice louder than the last. "I am not like you, Mama," Zuri whispered to herself, though she knew her mother could never hear. "I am not like you." The winds whispered in the distance, carrying with them the promise of change. The village that had once hummed with harmony and peace now stirred with whispers of dissent. News of Zuri's defiance spread like wildfire, and it was not long before every corner of the village held divided hearts. Some villagers, especially the younger ones, spoke of Zuri with admiration. They whispered about how brave she was, how she dared to dream of something more than the life set before her. "She seeks freedom," they said, their voices tinged with awe. "She has the courage to live beyond the rules." But not everyone saw it that way. Old men and women who had lived their lives by the village's sacred laws turned their heads with disapproval. They shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring under their breath that Zuri was a danger, a threat to everything they had built. "The ancestors have spoken, and she would ignore their wisdom?" one elder muttered. "She is no better than a child who refuses to listen." As the days wore on, tension filled the air. The village, once united under the watchful eyes of the elders, now felt fractured, split by differing beliefs. The elders, who had always held unchallenged power, now found themselves questioned. For the first time in living memory, some wondered if the ancestors' laws were truly meant for everyone, or if they were simply chains that bound their spirits. The disruption did not go unnoticed by Elder Nia, the matriarch who had spent her life in communion with the ancestors. She had seen Zuri grow from a curious child into a young woman full of potential. But now, the fire in Zuri's heart worried her. She felt a deep sorrow settle in her bones as she summoned Zuri to her hut one evening. When Zuri entered, the room seemed colder, darker. Elder Nia's usually warm gaze was filled with concern. She motioned for Zuri to sit before her. "Zuri, my child," she began softly, "I have watched you with much affection. You are as the ancestors have spoken of, intelligent, bold, and full of promise. But now I see something in you that troubles me." Zuri's heart pounded in her chest. "What troubles you, Elder Nia? Have I done something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have defied the very heart of our traditions. And with that defiance you have drawn the attention of the ancestors themselves," Elder Nia said, her voice grave. "The spirits are not to be taken lightly. They have watched over our people for generations, guiding us, protecting us, bringing us blessings. But their protection comes with a price. When we turn from their ways, we invite their wrath." Zuri, looking into Elder Nia's troubled eyes, felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. "You speak of wrath as if we are slaves to their will. Are we to live our lives in fear, never daring to question the very laws that bind us?" she shot back, her voice shaking with defiance. Elder Nia closed her eyes for a moment as though seeking guidance from the spirits themselves. When she opened them again, there was a deep sadness in her gaze. "The ancestors are not tyrants, child. They guide us because they love us. They know what lies ahead, and they protect us from the dangers we cannot see. The path you walk now is one of great risk. To ignore their wisdom is to invite chaos into the village, and that chaos will touch not just you, but all of us. Zuri's chest tightened. "I am not afraid of their wrath," she declared, standing tall. "I will live my own life. No more will I be a puppet to these old stories and fears. I am my own master." Elder Nia watched her silently for a long time, the weight of her words hanging between them. Finally, with a sigh, she said, "Then know this, Zuri. The ancestors are watching, and their judgment will be swift. If you continue down this path, the land itself will feel the pain of your choices. Do not say that I did not warn you." Zuri stood still, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. She felt the pressure of tradition closing in on her, yet the desire for freedom burned brighter than ever. Elder Nia's words echoed in her mind, but she pushed them away. She had made her decision. There was no turning back. The next morning, Zuri packed a small bundle and stood at the edge of the village. As she looked back one last time, she saw the familiar sights of the huts, the sacred grove where the ancestors' spirits were honored, the path she had walked all her life. Yet now it all seemed distant, like a world she no longer belonged to. Her chest tightened with both a sense of freedom and dread. "I will leave this place," she whispered to herself. "I will find my own way, where I am not bound by the past." As she turned to leave, the wind seemed to whisper in the trees, an unsettled murmur that Zuri could not ignore. It was as though the earth itself was telling her she was making a mistake, but the pull of independence was too strong to resist. She stepped forward, leaving behind the only life she had ever known, and walked into the unknown. That night, Zuri found herself standing in the sacred grove, under the ancient trees where the ancestors' spirits were said to dwell. The air felt thick with the power of the place, and Zuri could sense the eyes of the spirits upon her. She had come here before, but never with such purpose. Her heart pounded as she walked to the altar where the sacred artifact rested, a small, intricately carved stone that the villagers believed was the link between their world and the ancestors. The elders said it carried the power to ensure the village's prosperity and connection to the spirits. It was sacred, untouchable. Yet now, Zuri felt it calling to her. "This will sever me from their grasp," she muttered under her breath as she reached for the artifact, her hands trembling. Without a second thought, she took the stone in her hands and slipped it into her bundle. A rush of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She was free, truly free, or so she thought. The weight of the artifact felt heavy in her hands, and for a moment Zuri hesitated. But the thought of returning to the village, to a life dictated by others, was unbearable. The next morning, the elders sensed the disturbance in the grove. Elder Nia was the first to feel it, a deep unease that settled into her bones like a cold wind. "The spirits are restless," she muttered, her voice laced with fear. A procession of elders gathered, led by Elder Nia, to perform the cleansing ritual. As they chanted and offered sacrifices, the very air seemed to grow heavier. The village was filled with a sense of foreboding, a weight that pressed down on their spirits. But as the rituals were performed, it was clear that the damage had been done. The spirits were not at peace. The elders' prayers could not undo the theft, and the sacred grove, once the heart of the village, now felt distant and cold. The ancestors were angry, and the village would feel their wrath. Zuri had taken the first step toward freedom, but in doing so, she had brought a curse upon the land. The storm had only just begun. Zuri walked steadily through the dense forest, her heart beating heavily in her chest. The path ahead was winding, twisting into shadows, and the air felt unnatural, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. She had not yet reached the town, but the sense of freedom that had once filled her was now being replaced with a growing unease. The sun, which had been warm and bright just a short while ago, now seemed to hide behind a blanket of thick gray clouds. The light had dimmed, leaving her to navigate by a pale, eerie glow. The wind picked up, swirling around her, whispering through the trees like voices from a distant place, a place beyond the world of the living. "You cannot escape," the wind seemed to murmur. "You cannot leave us." Zuri's hands trembled, but she pushed on, the weight of her decision still heavy in her heart. It had been her choice to break away from the village, from the expectations that had tied her down. Yet, now that she was alone, the strange whispers only seemed louder, more insistent, and they filled her with a chilling dread. Through the trees, she saw flickers of movement, shapes, shadows, figures she couldn't quite make out. They moved in the corner of her vision, vanishing when she turned to face them directly. She quickened her pace, feeling the land itself stir beneath her feet, trembling as though trying to warn her, trying to hold her back. The animals of the forest, once shy and peaceful, now seemed to watch her with glowing, unnatural eyes. A pack of wild dogs crossed her path, their eyes burning with an unnatural fire. Their growls echoed in her ears like a distant drumbeat, warning her of the danger she was walking into. She paused, and the sound of her breathing seemed louder than ever. Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is happening?" she whispered to herself, but no answer came from the wind. Back in the village, the elders gathered in urgent council. Elder Nia's wrinkled hands trembled as she held the council staff, her voice shaking with fear. "She has broken the bond," she said, her voice low and filled with sorrow. "She has stolen from us. The ancestors will not forgive such disrespect." Elder Temba, whose voice had once been as steady as the river's flow, now spoke with an edge of desperation. "We must act quickly. We must perform the ritual of restoration, or the spirits will take their wrath upon us all. The balance is shifting." The elders could feel it, the tension in the air, the shifting of something ancient and powerful. The connection between their village and the spirits had always been strong, upheld by the sacred practices passed down from their ancestors. But now, that connection had been severed. Zuri's defiance had ignited a storm that threatened to consume them all. And as the elders prepared the sacred offerings for the ritual, the land seemed to grow colder, darker, as if the earth itself was mourning the loss of their harmony. The air was thick with prayers and fear, and they all knew that the consequences of Zuri's actions were beyond their control. Zuri continued her journey, her steps heavy with the weight of what she had done. The storm that had been gathering, for hours now, broke over her like a beast unleashed. The winds howled in fury, tearing at her clothes and whipping her hair about her face. Thunder cracked through the sky with a deafening roar, and lightning split the heavens, striking the ground so close that Zuri felt the heat on her skin. In the midst of this chaos, something began to form before her. A figure, tall and shrouded in light, glowing with an ethereal radiance. It moved with a slow, deliberate pace, and as it came into focus, Zuri could see the burning eyes that gazed at her with ancient power. The figure was not human. It was a spirit, an ancestor sent to confront her. "Zuri," the voice echoed, deep and commanding, like the rumbling of thunder. "You have defied the sacred laws of our people. You have dishonored the bond between us and the spirits. You cannot escape the consequences of your actions." Zuri's heart raced. She had heard stories of the ancestors' wrath, but she had never imagined she would face it herself. The wind howled, and the rain battered against her, but she stood firm, her defiance still burning in her chest. "You have no power over me," she shouted, her voice cracked but strong. "The traditions are old. The spirits are nothing but shadows from the past. I will live my life on my terms, not bound by your rules." The spirit's eyes flared, burning with fury. The earth beneath Zuri's feet trembled, and the ground seemed to crack open, a dark force rising from the depths of the earth. "You dare mock the spirits?" The voice boomed. "You are but a child of the ancestors, and your pride blinds you. You think you can sever the ties that bind you, but you are wrong. The very blood that courses through your veins belongs to us. And now, you will face the price of your arrogance." Zuri's knees buckled as the force of the Spirit's power pressed down on her. She gasped for breath, struggling against the overwhelming pressure. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat, swallowed by the weight of her defiance. The ground beneath her cracked open and a cold, malevolent force surged through her body. Her skin began to twist, her body withering as if the very life was being drained from her. The sacred artifact she had stolen, the object that she believed would give her power, was swallowed by the earth, consumed by the abyss from which it had come. Pain coursed through Zuri's body, her flesh burning and twisting as the curse took hold. Her vision blurred, and her cries were silenced as the curse consumed her from within. She was neither dead nor alive, trapped in an endless state of torment, forever disconnected from the world she had known. As Zuri's torment unfolded, her family felt the weight of her actions. Her mother, Mama Amina, fell gravely ill. Her once strong body weakened, her skin pale and drained of life. Kofi, Zuri's younger brother, watched helplessly as his crops withered and his livestock died. The village, once prosperous and full of hope, now began to feel the consequences of Zuri's defiance. The rivers ran dry and the land grew barren. Whispers spread through the village, murmurs of Zuri's betrayal and the fear of the ancestors. Wrath. The villagers grew wary, their once strong faith shaken, and trust began to erode. The elders, once revered as the wise protectors of the community, now faced the fury of the villagers. Their inability to prevent the curse from taking root had left them powerless. The people turned their eyes from the elders, seeking answers that they did not have. The village, which had once thrived under their guidance, now began to fracture under the weight of fear and anger. The cries of the people filled the air as the elders stood silent, their faces heavy with regret. They had failed to protect the balance between the living and the ancestors, and now they too would face the consequences of Zuri's actions. The village was broken, its unity shattered, and there was no easy path to redemption. The curse, once unleashed, could not be undone. The spirits had spoken, and their judgment was final. The village lay heavy under a darkened sky, one that seemed to mourn the changes that had come. Zuri's feet dragged across the earth, every step an ache deep in her bones. The once radiant young woman, full of defiance and strength, now walked as a shadow of herself. Her beauty, stolen by the curse, had faded into something almost unrecognizable. Her face was gaunt, hollowed by sorrow and the weight of her actions. Her once bright eyes now gleamed with the dullness of regret, the fire that had burned so fiercely now smothered by the guilt she could not escape. As she entered the village, the earth beneath her feet trembled, as if the land itself rejected her presence. The birds no longer sang, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The villagers who had once admired her, envied her, now stood silent, their gazes filled with a mix of fear and pity. The legacy of her defiance had tainted them all. In the distance, Mama Amina stood at the threshold of their hut, her frail body casting a long, thin shadow on the ground. The sickness that had taken root in her body had not spared her the heaviness of the curse. Zuri's heart clenched, her mother's once strong arms now weak, her face drawn with lines of pain. She had come to see the consequences of her actions with clarity. The curse was not just upon her, but upon everyone she loved. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Mama." Mama Amina reached out a trembling hand. "Zuri," she said softly, her voice strained with both love and sorrow. "You've come back, but what have you brought with you?" Zuri dropped her gaze, unable to answer, for the truth was too painful to speak. The earth itself seemed to weep as she stood there, the village around her as still and silent as the grave. She had lost more than her beauty. She had lost herself. Elder Nia sat at the edge of the sacred grove, her frail body leaning heavily against a twisted tree, the bark darkened by time and sorrow. The curse had weakened her, draining her strength, but her spirit remained unyielding. She had seen the signs, felt the weight of what was to come. Zuri's defiance had placed them, all in danger, and now it was time for her to face what she had set in motion. Her voice was but a whisper, but its urgency filled the air. "Zuri," she called, summoning the young woman to come. "The spirits are waiting." Zuri, broken and weary, made her way to the sacred grove. She could not avoid the truth any longer. The weight of her actions pressed upon her like a stone. She had stolen from the spirits, defied her ancestors, and now the land itself had turned against her. The path to redemption lay before her, but it would not be an easy one. As she entered the grove, the ancient trees seemed to bow in sorrow, their leaves rustling with a sound like whispered voices. She approached Elder Nia, her heart heavy with the weight of the judgment she knew was coming. "Elder Nia," Zuri said, her voice soft, "I've come. What must I do?" Elder Nia's eyes, though clouded with age, held a sharpness that pierced through Zuri. "You have come, but it is not enough. You must confront the ancestors, for it is they who have been wronged. Return the artifact you took, but understand this. The spirits do not ask for gifts. They ask for a sacrifice. Only then will the balance be restored." Zuri stood, trembling as the weight of the words settled on her. "A sacrifice," she echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. "What more can they take from me? Everything has already been taken." "Elder," Nia's gaze softened, but there was no compassion in her voice, only truth. "It is not what the ancestors have taken from you, but what you are willing to give to them. You must offer yourself to the spirits, for it is only in humility that your redemption can be found." The grove seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the tension of ages past. Zuri's heart raced. To offer herself. What would that even mean? She had once dreamed of freedom from the shackles of tradition, but now it seemed that freedom was an illusion, a dream that had cost her everything. Zuri knelt before the sacred altar, the stolen artifact in her hands. The air around her seemed to pulse with the presence of the ancestors, their power ancient and undeniable. She placed the artifact on the altar, her hands trembling. The spirits stirred, their whispers like a distant storm, echoing in the air, around her. But it was not enough. The land beneath her feet trembled, and a deep, foreboding voice filled the grove. "Zuri, daughter of this land," it boomed, "you have returned what was taken, but that is not enough. The spirits demand more than an offering. You have defied us, and now we demand a sacrifice that will restore the balance between the living and the dead." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. "A sacrifice," she whispered. "What more can I give?" The voice grew colder, sharper. "You must give what you hold most dear, the very thing that keeps you from returning to us. Your freedom, Zuri. Your pride. Only then will we consider your atonement." Zuri gasped, the weight of the choice pressing on her chest like a boulder. She could feel the earth shifting beneath her, the curse tightening its grip on her body. There was no escaping this. The decision was no longer hers to make. In a moment of crushing clarity, Zuri understood. Her redemption would come at the cost of everything she had fought for. Her autonomy, her dreams of a life beyond tradition. The spirits demanded her submission, and in that submission, she would find her only chance at peace. With trembling hands, Zuri performed the ancient ritual, offering herself to the spirits and the land. As she chanted the sacred words, the earth beneath her quaked. The curse that had twisted her body began to lift, its power leaving her like a great weight lifted from her shoulders. But the relief was bittersweet. The cost of her redemption was high. She had chosen the path of submission, and the scars of her defiance would never fade. The land seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but Zuri knew that her soul would carry the burden of her actions for the rest of her days. When Zuri returned to the village, it was not the same woman who had left. She was older now, her eyes filled with the wisdom of one who had lived through the very fire of judgment. Her heart was heavy, but it was also filled with the strength that only humility could bring. She sought out her younger brother, Kofi, and found him working the fields, his face marked by the strain of the curse. The crops had withered under its weight, and the village's once prosperous land had become barren. "Kofi," Zuri said, her voice soft yet firm, "we must honor our ancestors, respect their teachings, and understand that the balance between us and the spirits is sacred. Without that respect, we cannot survive." Kofi looked at her, his eyes filled with both sadness and curiosity. "But what about you, Zuri? What have we lost?" Zuri took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We have lost much, Kofi, but it is not too late. Together, we will rebuild. Together, we will honor what is sacred and restore what has been broken." As the seasons changed, Zuri and Kofi worked to heal their family and their village. They tended to the land, performed the rituals with care, and restored the faith of the people. But Zuri knew, deep in her heart, that the scars of her past would never truly fade. The ancestors had forgiven her, but the road to redemption was long, and the path was fraught with the lessons of humility and the weight of her own soul. And so, the village began to heal, not just in body, but in spirit. The earth, once again, became fertile, the crops began to grow, and the river returned to its course. Yet Zuri understood that the greatest healing would come not from the land, but from within. For true redemption, she had learned, came not from appeasing the ancestors, but from living with the consequences of one's actions and finding peace in the humility that followed. With that, the story of Zuri came full circle, a tale of defiance, judgment, and redemption. A reminder that in the eyes of the ancestors, the price of pride is high, and the path to peace is carved with the stones of humility and sacrifice. As the years passed, the villagers often gathered around the fire, their faces lit by its warm glow. Children, who had never known Zuri as anything but a cautionary tale, listened intently to the elders' stories. The tale of Zuri, once the pride of the village, became the village's most powerful lesson. The elders spoke of her defiance, of the day when Zuri chose to reject the will of the ancestors. Her story was woven into the fabric of the community's teachings, her name becoming synonymous with the price of pride. As the years turned, the lesson of her life spread, echoing through the generations. The air was thick with respect for tradition, for those who had come before, and the spirits who watched over them. Elder Kofi rose one evening, his voice breaking the silence. The village had gathered to hear his words, and they were filled with solemnity as he began. "Listen, my children," he said, his voice carrying the weight of age and wisdom. "There was once a woman named Zuri. She was loved by all, her beauty, her strength, her intelligence, but she did not listen to the whispers of the ancestors. She did not honor the sacred laws of our land. The spirits became angry, and the earth trembled with their wrath." He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd, making sure every ear was attuned to his words. But in the end, Zuri learned that we are all bound by the spirits, and that no one is above them. Her tale is now part of our story, and we will remember her, not for the pride she carried, but for the price she paid. May we never forget what happens when we turn away from the traditions that bind us. The children, sitting cross-legged on the ground, looked up at the elder in awe. They would carry this lesson in their hearts. To them, Zuri's name was no longer spoken in anger, but as a reminder of humility. Elder Nia, once frail but now restored, in spirit, stepped forward. Her face, though aged, was full of determination as she spoke next. "We must ensure that no one forgets what has been taught through Zuri's suffering. The elders are here to guide you. We are the ones who know the spirits. We have felt their power, and we speak for them. The village must trust us, as we trust in them." Her words rang out, steady and firm. The villagers, once questioning the authority of the elders, now bowed their heads in reverence. They understood now. The elders were the bridge between them and the spirits. They had seen the village suffer, watched the land grow weak, but now the elders stood as pillars of strength. Their authority had been reaffirmed, their wisdom now a guiding light. As the moon climbed higher, the elders gathered once more in the sacred grove. They stood tall, casting shadows over the earth, and as they did, they recalled the legacy of Zuri's bloodline. Though her defiance had left deep scars, it did not mark the end of her family. Zuri's children and grandchildren, once viewed with suspicion, were now seen with compassion. The villagers knew that they too carried the weight of Zuri's choices but now bore the mantle of redemption. Zuri's bloodline, though forever marked by the pain of the past, had become a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. "Her blood runs in their veins," said Elder Kofi softly one evening, "but it is tempered by the lessons of her story. They are not cursed, but chosen to carry the legacy of healing and renewal." Zuri's descendants, now young men and women, worked tirelessly to rebuild the bonds that had been strained. They found respect in their community, knowing they were not condemned for the sins of their mother, but understood that they carried the lessons of her past mistakes. The spirits, though silent to the eyes of the living, were always present. The villagers knew that they had seen the devastation Zuri had wrought, and the earth had trembled beneath the weight of her actions. But now, through her repentance, through her sacrifice, peace had been restored. It was the spirits who brought the rains once again, nourishing the land that had once been barren. It was the spirits who guided the sun across the sky, bringing hope to the village. Zuri's tale, though tragic, had restored balance between the living and the dead. And so every child born in the village would hear the story of Zuri. Every elder, every man and woman would know the weight of the Spirit's law. And in the future, when the winds whispered through the trees and the fire crackled in the night, the village would remember, the price of defiance is high, but through humility, through repentance, the spirits may yet forgive. The village would endure, its heart strengthened by the lessons of the past, its people bound together by a shared understanding of their place in the world, under the watchful eyes of the ancestors. The story of Zuri would live on, not as a tale of shame, but as a living lesson, a song of the past that would be sung for generations to come.